Welcome, everyone. This is Leon Zito with the Institute of Transportation Studies at the University of California, Davis. We're excited to have you join us today for today's webinar, Automated Analysis of Wildlife Vehicle Conflict Hotspots Using Carcass and Collision Data. This webinar will cover the critical elements of data collection needed to inform hotspot analysis, an overview of an automated online tool that provides any U.S. state user in a way to map densities and statistically significant clusters of wildlife vehicle conflict hotspots, and provide next steps in automating data collection, management, reporting, and use in decision-making. This webinar is brought to you by the Pacific Southwest Region University Transportation Center in partnership with the UC Davis Institute of Transportation Studies. The Pacific Southwest Region University Transportation Center is the Region 9 University Transportation Center funded under the U.S. Department of Transportation's UTC program. Established in 2016, the Pacific Southwest Region UTC is led by the University of Southern California and includes 7 partners: UC Davis, Long Beach State University, UC Irvine, UCLA, University of Hawaii, Northern Arizona University, and Pima Community College. The PSR conducts an integrated multidisciplinary program of research, education, and technology transfer aimed at improving the mobility of people and goods throughout the region. The Institute of Transportation Studies at UC Davis is the leading university center in the world on sustainable transportation, hosting the National Center on Sustainable Transportation since 2013 and managing large research initiatives on energy, environmental, and social issues. It is home to more than 60 affiliated faculty and researchers and more than 120 graduate students. ITS Davis has a strong commitment not just to research, but interdisciplinary education and engagement with government, industry, and non-government organizations. Following the presentation, we have a Q&A session where we will pull audience questions for our speakers. If you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A window by clicking the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. Our speaker today is Dr. Fraser Schilling, co-director of the UC Davis Road Ecology Center. We also have 2 special guest respondents, Nova Simpson, Northern Nevada Biological Supervisor and Wildlife Mitigation Specialist at the Nevada Department of Transportation, and Richard Bostwick, biologist from the Maine Department of Transportation. I'll now hand it over to Nova Simpson to tell us a little bit more about herself.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Nova Simpson. I work for the Nevada Department of Transportation in the Environmental Services Division. I, deal with a lot of the wildlife mitigation around the state, and so I'm interested in participating today because we recently worked on a statewide prioritization of our conflict areas with the research team under Dr. Patty Kramer. And in that report, we looked at the last 10 years of animal vehicle collision data. That report helped us focus our efforts and create this prioritization that also helped with internal and external discussions, which built support, which has allowed us to work towards overlapping some of our project areas and priority areas with other projects around the state for department needs. So it always helps reduce the funding or the expenses towards these types of projects. So we also were working on this at the same time. UC Davis was working on their mapping program. So I spoke with Dr. Schilling about doing kind of a comparison of what that report showed versus what his hotspot tool reported. And so one of the things I really liked about Dr. Schilling's that you're getting ready to see is that it's a quick and easy map for interpretation with the scoring values. It's done easily, so you can easily update it on a regular basis, and you can do some comparisons between years. So it has some strengths that the other report maybe was lacking. No, they both dealt with different specifics, so they both have definitely strengths. So I think you'll see it's interesting to use this tool for a more quick snapshot of the areas, and it can be updated very frequently, which I thought was helpful. So I'm excited to be part of the discussion today.
And now I'll hand it over to Richard Bostwick to tell us a little bit about himself.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great, Richard.
Okay, thank you. Yep, my name is Richard Bostwick. I'm a biologist with the Maine Department of Transportation. For the past years, I've been pushing efforts to improve habitat connectivity and to reduce animal vehicle collisions on Maine's highways. And we've been doing that a bunch of ways through, warnings and, passage structures and so forth. I helped lead the effort in 2004 to look at issues around, wildlife and roads. We were in the process of planning a bypass around Gorham, Maine, and we used that to look for high crash areas on adjacent roads, and then looked at the road that we were planning and building and put in, passage structures along that road. We find, we've been since then doing a lot of data collections. We had a fairly large roadkill survey effort going on around highways that we were planning, and segments of highways that needed upgrades. We stopped the effort around 2007, but Maine, we partnered with the Maine Audubon, which had a road watch effort going on, and we helped them with their effort to do roadkill surveys. And Maine Audubon, Maine Dot then partnered with UC Davis to help kind of improve upon that effort and move it forward. We find that animal crashes are both a habitat and safety issues, and so what we are looking for ways to proactively find areas where there might be a safety or habitat connectivity issue, and then try to address those as we do roadways. And so that is where kind of with working with Fraser and UC Davis has become a great tool in our toolbox. So right now that's me.
All right, thank you, Richard, and thanks, Nova. This is Fraser Schilling with the Road Ecology Center, and I'm your presenter today. I put the information, you can read more about our work, our studies at roadecology.ucdavis.edu, or you can email me directly about this presentation or other work. And thanks to the Pacific Southwest Region Transportation Research Center for their support, and to ITS, Institute of Transportation Studies, for facilitating the presentation today. So I'm going to talk about automated analysis of wildlife vehicle conflict hotspots using Carcass and collision data. And so first I'm going to talk about how we collect and think about these kinds of data, and then I'll walk you through the automated tool that we have online, and then some possible next steps for people who want to do more with these kinds of data. Whoops, I'm not able to change. Do you remember how to change slides? Excuse me, people, I'm having a slight technical difficulty. There we go. All right, so I want to acknowledge my state partners, and they've really helped a lot in development of the tool. Colorado, Idaho, Maine, Minnesota, and Nevada. Again, the PSR, and then some folks at UC Davis who've helped develop the tool, and then all the contributors to the California Roadkill Observation System, which will feature later. So I wanted to define wildlife vehicle conflict, and the way that we're using the term these days is to include collisions, but it's really any negative interaction between wildlife and vehicles. This usually is defined as just the collisions, but we're finding increasingly that as drivers respond to animals in the roadway, they might swerve to avoid a collision with the animal, but they may end up in a crash themselves. And also animals may avoid roadways because of traffic and other reasons, and therefore never try to cross a road, which might protect them from a collision, but also may fragment populations. So wildlife vehicle conflict can cost hundreds of millions of dollars a year in damages in individual states. So collectively across the country, this is definitely a $1 billion or greater problem per year. And the damages could be to vehicles, to people, to animals. So for example, in California, our estimate of damage from wildlife vehicle conflict is about $300 million a year. And a nice thing or an interesting thing about wildlife vehicle conflict is that we know enough now that we can actually avoid and reduce this problem. You're going to hear a little bit of background noise just from it. We have street sweepers going by because we're having quite a lot of rain here in California. So wildlife vehicle conflict mitigation is an activity that a lot of departments of transportation are engaged in these days. Probably a lot of you on the phone do this for work. And there's a workflow that's common to this process of mitigating wildlife vehicle conflict, and it's shown in this diagram. Usually it starts with collecting information about the wildlife vehicle conflict. This could be about the animals, or it could be about the crashes. There's a data management step, and so the wildlife vehicle conflict data, once collected, is managed quite often in spreadsheets on desktops, but more often in web systems. And so these data can be used in different kinds of spatial data analysis and non-spatial data analysis. And it can lead to identification of types and locations of mitigation activities. Important in this workflow is that we keep track of the data. So that's the data provenance, the metadata and data that we're using in this system. We want to have assurance of the quality of the data, the level of effort, how evenly distributed it is, any biases we might have, and accuracy. I'm going to talk about these three highlighted areas of the mitigation workflow, from data collection to analysis. So wildlife vehicle collision or conflict data collection these days usually involves some kind of app. That could be a pure smartphone app. So this is some little icon you might see on your smartphone screen. Or it could include a web app or web application, such as the one that Utah DOT developed or the California system. These often use a form to collect the data. This is a necessary component or perceived necessary component of collecting these data, but it can also be a barrier for collecting the data because only so many people want to complete a form for each of these events. Typically, these days, you can collect the GPS coordinates automatically. For example, if you have a phone that takes a picture and you have your GPS on, then the lat long of the picture, your location when you're taking the picture, are recorded as part of the image. Also, date and time and whoever the user is. So there's a lot of automated data collection that's possible through a smartphone app or a web application. So it speeds up the process of data collection. There's a lot of different other ways that people are collecting data around the world. These can be a tablet or web form. It could be through social media. So in South Africa, for example, a lot of the roadkill observations collected there are through social media platforms rather than through any kind of web form. Or it could be legacy data. So there are many states where there have been records of wildlife vehicle conflict kept for years, and these might be in hard copy or spreadsheet form, which as time goes by, those data might never enter a web database or spatial analysis, but they certainly have a lot of value from that point of view. The slide here shows the basic attributes of wildlife vehicle conflict data that are important to collect. And the 5 here, what, where, when, why, and who, if these attributes are available for wildlife vehicle conflict data, many of the types of analyses that we take for granted can be conducted. And that really helps to simplify the data collection process for the data collector, which is often a different person than the analyst. So the first here is what species, and usually we want an image to verify the species identification. Where was it located on a map or with just coordinates? When did it happen or when was it observed? why did it happen? And this can be very important for trying to reduce vehicle collisions. You want to know, are these severe accidents? What kinds of vehicles are affected? And especially departure from road accidents, which can be much more damaging than crashes on the road. And then finally, who observed or recorded the incident? And that helps us with the data provenance. Those attributes are included in how we manage and record the data. So the list here is of different things that you would do during managing these kinds of data, and then the diagram on the right is a data model or database model showing different kinds of data you would collect and the attributes of those data. And it might be hard for you to read in this version, but we're going to have the slides posted online afterwards so you can see more detail. And so these data management steps include information about the user. You want to have a secure interaction between, say, a smartphone and a server if you're collecting data that way. And you want to track the provenance of the record. How did it get into the system? Was it revised at all? And any kind of deletion of records. Often we can, with different systems, do what we think of as bulk imports or exports. And so you would take a large amount of data from a resource, such as a legacy data set, and include them in a more contemporary, say, web relational database through a bulk import mechanism. And quite often you also want to be able to export those data for if somebody has a data query. For example, a district within a state, a district of a DOT within a state may want all the data that's been collected for their district. Usually it's necessary to integrate different kinds of data. This is can be quite a challenging exercise, especially when you include images, which are a standalone file and separate from other aspects of a data record in a database. Sorry, we're going to have a little bit of street sweeper noise again. I apologize if you can hear that in the background. And then another step is to serve up and visualize the data. And this is probably one of the most important steps because it really justifies why the data were collected in the first place. Usually we collect these data because we want to use them in analysis, or we want to see them in a map, and we want to help make decisions using the data. And so that's a critical step, is to be able to do that. And then finally, we need to think about long-term storage of these data. What's the long-term plan, the 10-year plan, the 20-year plan for data, especially if it's in a web system where it may be harder for lots of people to access it. So the example I'm going to give and talk about mostly today is at this URL, roadecology.ucdavis.edu/hotspots. And it is a system that anybody can use within the US and looking at state highways. So the road systems that we have for doing the automated analysis are the state highway system, or is the state highway system, and it's only within the US. So if you're calling from outside the country, I'm sorry, we don't have it yet for other countries. In this system, the data are uploaded by the user. We can accommodate data sets up to 30,000 records, and we're working on expanding that, especially for ourselves here in California, where our data set is bigger than what our tool can handle. But that should be up to 100,000 probably within the year. So I think every state in the US should be able to use this tool for quite a long time. And once the data has been uploaded and the analysis started, the user will receive back a shapefile with the hotspots, which indicates densities and clusters of points. So those are the hotspots, the high density areas and the clusters. Charts of results, and then what we call a mini GIS, which is a file that you can open in a browser and click boxes on and off showing different attributes of the hotspots analysis. It's an easy thing to share with others and to demonstrate the hotspot analysis. So these analytical products really take one big part of a statewide assessment of WVC and automates it and provides the service for free for any any user in the US. I'm going to show you some examples of some of the data that we use to develop the tool. These are data from the different states that we partnered with. So in Idaho, the Department of Fish and Game has a roadkill reporting system, which allows for volunteer reporting. It also has the state agency reporting, so maintenance staff with the DOT and Department of Fish and Game staff, and then any volunteers or members of the public who want to contribute data. It's an 8-year-old system, and they have about 24,000 carcass records, and this is showing the mule deer and white-tailed deer incidents within the state, this map. In Maine, as Richard was discussing, they have quite a long-term system for large animal collisions, and so these are carcasses of moose and deer primarily. And they have about 30,000 carcass records, and it's a 15-year-old system, and these data are collected by agency staff. There's a parallel system that Maine Audubon operates that we developed for them that Richard for Maine also referenced, and that has many more species, but fewer of the collision records with the large animals. And then in California, we have a pair of systems similar to Maine's pair of systems. One is anybody can enter a roadkill observation in the California roadkill observation system, and the other is a system that collects crash data from the California Highway Patrol web system. We have about 420 species represented in that database. There's about 80,000 records altogether, and the system is going to hit 10 years old this August. We share these data with a lot of different entities. So those are some of the data sets we use to help develop this tool. And I'm going to walk you through some of the principles we used, which should be, this should remind you of things that you already know and that maybe you do in your work. The first is that we think of these clusters or hotspots as a combination of high density, areas of high densities of wildlife vehicle conflict and or spatially or statistically significant clusters where the incidents are clustered together, which helps us to make decisions then about what kinds of actions we want to take. So this shows a model road with a series of white circles which represent those WVC incidents, and you can see that they are sprinkled along, and the road color represents the different densities of those incidents on different segments of the road. So the red line there indicates the highest density, and that's an area that we would probably want to focus on, except possibly when you have your whole, say, 200-mile highway is all red. So sometimes you can have incidents spread evenly across roadways and not clustered, but you still have a lot of incidents. So it's one type of thing that you can see. But quite often we have these high density areas that stand alone, and you have a lot of clustering of incidents. And so those might be places we want to act. You can also have medium or moderate density relative to other parts of the roadway, and those might seem less important, but what's important here is to think about not just the densities relative to other parts of the roadway, but the densities relative to a threshold that you want to choose to act. So for example, if you have 1 to 2 collisions with deer on a roadway per mile per year, then you're reaching a level where it might be cost effective to do the mitigation action to reduce the rates of collision. The arrow to the left indicates a location where there's a moderate density, but it's highly clustered relative to the roadway segments around it, and that might be an area of action. Then you're going to have low density areas where there's very few wildlife vehicle conflict incidents, and then the blue segments in between indicate that there's no incidents reported. Those might be interesting to keep track of because you want to see if they change. And especially for the areas where there's no wildlife vehicle conflict incidents reported, if you know that there's people looking at that stretch of the road, there's maintenance staff going through, there's state patrol keeping track of accidents, then those might actually be areas to learn about how animals are either safely crossing the road or avoiding the road altogether. So just looking at these two clusters, one explanation for the one on the left might be that you have a waterway going through. We've noticed anecdotally that where there are waterways crossing highways, even if there's a bridge where animals seem like they should be able to go through, they sometimes don't go under the bridge and they just hop up out of that riparian corridor onto the highway and get hit. So I'm going to walk you through some of the automated data analysis steps. And these assume that we have these sources of data from crash reports or Carcass data collection, and we take them through a web database, a web-based database, through a data analysis step, and then resulting in some kind of output, such as a web map that can be a feed to these different kinds of audiences. So one important aspect of this last step is that we want the display or the visualization of information to be both science-based, so we're confident that we are displaying good information and that the analysis is a scientific analysis, but we also want to inform different kinds of audiences, and these could be members of the public and they're just interested in the problem. It could be an agency to make mitigation decisions, and more recently it could be an autonomous vehicle that receives information about these incidents, especially where they're higher density. Some of the wildlife vehicle conflict data basics that I talked about earlier are what is the species, where was it located, when did it happen, why did it happen, and who observed it. And these are all the data that we use in the automated analysis system, and in other countries where there are similar systems, they use these same kinds of attributes. And actually, what this tells us is that if you collect these attributes of each incident, then you've collected the most important data usually for that incident. It's not all the possible data, but by limiting the number of data steps, it probably helps with the data collection process. So the automated tool, as I said, can be found at roadecology.ucdavis.edu/hotspots, and I'm going to walk you quickly through it. There's also a help page, so instructions on how to do it, and it's a fairly simple process. The critical thing about the tool is that it does expect to get data in a certain format. So this was, in the earlier working with states, was one of the steps that we had to go back and forth through a few times to make it better for the user. There are 3 different kinds of formats the data can come in: a CSV or comma separated value table, a shapefile, or an Excel spreadsheet. There are certain field names that need to be used. So for example, lat long representing latitude, longitude. We had some data that were entered with X coordinate, Y coordinate as those fields, but we require certain field names so that the system can recognize those. And then the fields that have things like species name need to be formatted as text. The date needs to be formatted as a date field. And then the number of events per number of animals per event needs to be formatted as a number. As I said earlier, the maximum data set size is 30,000 records. And the reason for this is that one of the steps the system does automatically is to take all of the points that are theoretically along a highway and do something that's called snap to line. It basically moves all those points perpendicular until they're on top of the line, which is the roadway. And that process with a large number of records can be relatively slow and can time out our system. But that's just a question of increasing the capacity of the system so that it doesn't time out, and we're working on that. The analysis can be run for any state. We use the state highway data from USDOT, and the steps for doing this are basically creating an account, logging in, uploading the data file with the correct format, and then clicking save. And once you do that, the system runs a series of scripts to unpack data, reproject the data, snap the points to the highway line. The system calculates density of points per mile, We're also, at the request of Idaho, working on different segment lengths for half-mile and quarter-mile. It calculates the spatial autocorrelation, so the statistically significant clustering of points, calculates a hotspot score, which you can read about online on the system, and it produces different kinds of outputs, and I'll show you some examples of those. So the different outputs include a shapefile, a series of graphs and different graphics, and then this leaflet map. So Leaflet is the name of the software that's operating the map in a browser window. And this shows the data from Minnesota, the incident density data for Minnesota clicked. And so if you look at the map, the top right corner, there's a menu of boxes that can be clicked. This just shows 2. For some states, we've had as many as 8 or 10 boxes. So if you click different boxes, you can get different results in the browser window. This shows some examples of the charts for Nevada, and also a slightly larger menu of clickable boxes next to the map. Anything from all of the incidents to just domestic animals or just wild animal incidents, densities, and hotspots. And then the charts to the lower left show the number of wildlife vehicle conflict incidents by month, the type of the animal, and the incidents by time of day. So there's different kinds of outputs. I want to show an example from California where we have taken this a step further. So in the map to the right, you can see, hopefully you can see that there's different lines. Those are the highways, and they range in color from blue to red. Blue is low density or no incidents, and red is high density of incidents. And then there's a number of boxes to the right that show the hotspot score, the incidents, the Carcass reports from CROSS, or the California Roadkill Observation System, and then the incidents reported by the California Highway Patrol. So we're getting data from 2 different sources into this map. The important thing about this map is that it's in real time. So as these incidents are occurring and being reported, they're showing up in this real-time map. It's updated every 15 minutes, which is discretionary. It could be every 5 minutes. And so it gives us a real-time picture of, in this case, deer incidents and large wildlife incidents throughout California. It uses an interface called Drupal, and there's custom scripts we use for retrieving data and displaying the data and for analyzing the data. If we zoom in, and if you zoom in on any part of this map, you are able to look at 2 kinds of 2 aspects of the data. One is the point data. So each of these incidents, you can click on it and see what kind of accident has been reported. So in the map to the right, it indicates traffic collision 1141 en route, and that means an ambulance is en route to this particular incident with a deer. And then the map to the bottom left, you can see it says road segment detail in the pop-out box, and that's showing different attributes of the road segment. In this case, it's Interstate 580, and how many incidents have been reported on that road segment in a year. So these kinds of data that I've been showing you and walking you through can lead to different kinds of outcomes or outputs. In this case, with the real-time system, it gives 2 pictures really. One is of with the hotspots map in the background. These are the places where there have been more incidents more often, leading to a higher density and in some places, a higher likelihood of clustering. And so these are our hotspots. So these are places you might choose to act from a state government point of view or federal government point of view. And then as a driver, you may want to know where are you more likely to get in trouble with wildlife and actually other kinds of incidents as well. So this system can be used to map any kind of incident. In this case, it's wildlife vehicle conflict incidents. So for example, if a connected autonomous vehicle has an animal detection system and you're driving through San Francisco in the Bay Area, you don't necessarily want that system turned on as you're driving along and detecting all the pedestrians on the sidewalk. But as you head out into the surrounding protected areas where we have a lot more conflict or collisions with large animals, primarily deer, then that system may need to be turned on. And once it's on, the data shown here could be a feed or a source of information for that system, a connected autonomous vehicle or driver assistance program, to say you're now entering an area with a higher likelihood of colliding with an animal. And so that would be an appropriate time for an animal detection system in the vehicle to be turned on. A different kind of decision, which probably a lot of you on the phone are engaged in, is in mitigating the conflict. And this, in its simplest form, would be taking the hotspot information, whether it's a higher density of incidents or clustering of incidents, and using it in parallel with project planning, as Richard was referencing earlier in Maine. So these maps show in California planned projects that Caltrans has on the books, either for stretches of highway, and that's indicated by the green highlighting, or yellow dots, which indicate a more spatially circumscribed project. And so if you know a project is coming up in these different areas, and it's also an area where there's high rates of wildlife vehicle conflict, then that might be a good place to put in, or would be a good place to put in mitigations for that wildlife vehicle conflict. And so that combined information of where projects are coming up, what types of projects are they, and where we have locations of wildlife vehicle conflict makes a really nice nexus for supporting those types of decisions. So I'll show you an example here. This is Interstate 680 in the East Bay, East San Francisco Bay area. And the red indicates that there's a fairly high rate of wildlife vehicle conflict incidents. There's also a planned project along this corridor. And so this would be an appropriate place to carry out mitigation activities. Similarly, along 101, US 101 through Marin County here, there's a high rate of incidents, and there's also several planned projects. And so this is another good place you could take some action. The important thing in that kind of decision-making is location of the incident, and this is where both timely and accurate recording of wildlife vehicle conflict information will help. And this location information could be the exact point where you have a clustering or high density, or it could be that for a long, very long stretch of the highway, you have a constantly high rate of collision. And the information that we're showing here could be used for either kind of decision. So I want to finish up, and gives us lots of time for response from our two respondents and questions from you all. So there is a question box that you can enter questions in. And for any of you who want to follow up with more information about the Road Ecology Center or about use of the tool, there's a series of URLs here. The one that says that ends in hotspots is the one that you're going to use for the automated hotspots analysis. So thanks very much for your attention, everybody. And let's open it up to the respondents to give some feedback and ask some questions.
Hi, Fraser. Go ahead, Nova.
Okay, I just wanted to ask, you were talking about that real-time system. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that took to set it up, what type of partnerships and data connections you needed to have for a real-time system like that?
Yeah, so the real-time part of it means that it's updated in our case, we've chosen every 15 minutes. And this is data retrieval from the California Highway Patrol. They have an online reporting system for incidents. It's kind of like their Waze. So Waze is a system where people can report something going on a highway so that other users of ways can see what's coming up in front of them. California Highway Patrol reports their incidents in real time, and we developed about 4 years ago a system for retrieving those incidents and then using what's called a text query to identify those incidents that have an animal involved. So the total number of incidents on state highways in California is about 700,000 per year, and 1% of those involve a wild animal, usually a deer, and then another, at least 1% involve a domestic animal. It's actually closer to 2%, so we have more incidents involving domestic animals than wild animals in California. So these are just the state highways, and so there's about 7,000 a year with wild animals, and those are the dots in the map essentially. So I'm going to go back to that. So each of those dots on the map represents one of those, and those are automatically displayed, and attributes of each of those incidents also automatically displayed, so that you can click on them and see what the incident was. There's very limited information in those dots when you click on them, and so that's something we can expand is more about each of those incidents. But it shows that there was some kind of conflict. In the best case scenario, which is a small percentage, it's just an animal standing next to the road and somebody was concerned about it. That could indicate that a collision could occur. And then the worst case scenario is somebody had a collision and major injuries were reported and there's an ambulance on the way. So we also see those as well. And so those are automatically ingested into the system, and then they're also included in the hotspots analysis.
So a follow-up to that is, how long does this report stay within the real-time data system? And if something happened yesterday, when does it fall off?
Yeah, it falls off after 7 days, which is a relatively long time. But if you're in something like the deer migration season, we have some areas in California where deer still migrate, a lot of areas where they don't. And maybe they're moving through a particular area, and if you're starting to see collisions there, that probably indicates that they're going to keep occurring there until the migration's over, or maybe rutting season is another reason why you might see more incidents. And then for some of the highways, it's less about a migration seasonality. Sorry again for the background noise, everybody. Might be less about migration seasonality and more time of day, or there's always deer around. So for example, in California, Interstate 280, there's a lot of deer that just hang around the interstate. But there's certain areas where they tend to get hit. And so seeing those clusters of points would help you to make a more informed decision when driving through there, especially at night.
Okay. Hi, Fraser. This is Richard. The real-time model, did you tap into an existing reporting system, or was that something that you had to partner with, like law enforcement and game wardens and others to develop?
It's an existing system. It's a service that the California Highway Patrol provides to the public, and so we just used that system as basically the source of data. They're not coded for the different kinds of incidents or accidents, so there's not a special code for that it involves a wild animal or domestic animal, so we have to do the text query for that part. But the data are served up by the Highway Patrol as a service to the public to inform them.
Okay. And so somebody wanting to get something like this would need their state to already have an existing reporting system. On the hotspot model, you mentioned clustered segments, and I think you said that Idaho wanted to get half mile and quarter mile segments. With the online tool, what would the default segment be?
So the default is 1 mile. So right now it's set up for a 1 mile cluster analysis. So the system snaps all those incident points to the highway line, then calculates the number of incident points per mile, so per mile segment, and then carries out the cluster analysis. So in the other cases, you would have the points snapped to the line, and then the density or the number of incidents, it would be per half a mile or per quarter mile. The rationale for doing that would be it gives you a finer comb to filter where are there really hot spots. So you might find that there's a pretty high density in a 1 mile segment. Then you do a finer analysis and find that it's all related to 1 quarter mile section that happens to cross over a creek or something like that. So that was the rationale, is to give a finer filter or finer scale analysis using the shorter segments. We don't want to go much below a quarter mile. We think that then we'll start to approach the resolution of the data. For the Highway Patrol, they're reporting from their vehicle, and their vehicle is usually near or next to, on top of the incident, but it also might be that they spotted a carcass and then pulled over, and maybe it's 100 meters further down, 100 yards further down. So we feel like a quarter mile is probably the finest resolution we can go, and we're still at a greater distance than any error there might be in the location of the incident.
Fraser, to follow up on that, when will the smaller segments be available?
Yeah, that's a good question, Nova. Thank you. Let's say by April. We've already started working on it. What we haven't, we've cut up all of the thousands of highway segments across the U.S. into those shorter sections. So we have all of those maps. What we haven't tested is if we reduce the length of the segment, we also increase the number of segments, and we might affect our processing time. Right now, our processing time, as a couple of you know, with the larger data sets, can be on the order of an hour or two. So we don't want to, we don't want to skyrocket that. That being said, we also want to do, a good analysis. So it could be that for some of the shorter segments, if people have very large data sets, it might be that we send them an email the following day and say, okay, now your output is ready. So we're still testing out that process to make sure it's not going to take too long to do the analysis. So let's say April.
So talking about data and records, you mentioned that right now the tool can't handle more than 30,000 records, but you're hoping to increase that. What recommendation would you make for people that have higher numbers of records?
So probably the key is to break the data sets into logical pieces. So for example, by species or by species groups. So if you have, say, 50,000 records of all roadkill, but you have 30,000 records of ungulates, so deer, elk, moose, etc., then maybe run the ungulates separately from the other data. Another is to run it by year, and so that would give you an annual hotspots report, and you can see if your hotspots move around, so to speak, if they occur in different places in different years. And then a third would be to do it by district or by other geographic subdivision. So those are ways that you could still do the hotspots analysis, but you're doing several steps. So say several districts or several years, one at a time.
Right now, does the online hotspot, can you get like data from time of day and month, or is that something that you have to automatically get? I mean, that you have to ask to have done.
We have the analysis of time of day of the incidents, so you get a chart that shows that, but we don't use it to conduct a seasonal analysis. And this is something we considered during the development of the tool, and I think I've talked to one or two of the states about this, whether or not we can show how the hotspots vary by season, and so you would need the date time data for that. We're not currently doing that. We do want to include, we want to keep including the date time field when people do the data upload, so that they can get other kinds of information such as the number of incidents per month or time of day. But in terms of the seasonality, we don't do that.
Fraser, I had a question about the results and ways to use those. So you know that the products can be accessed in the web browser, but what about downloading some of that stuff? Can the user download the shape files so they can use that within GIS for mapping purposes or planning purposes, as well as some of those graphs that you made? Are those all accessible to download for other purposes?
Yes. So the user gets a zip folder that they can click on and download, and it includes the shapefile, so it's the results of the analysis, the different charts, and then the browser map, the leaflet map, all included in that sort of package of information, I guess you could call it. It can be a fairly large zip file, but it won't take more than a couple of minutes in the largest case to download. And then that shapefile can be used in any GIS exercise. Because the shapefile output includes the density calculation, even if you didn't want to use our particular hotspots analysis method, you could still use that density per mile part of the shapefile in a different kind of cluster analysis. So it automates a step that can be sometimes difficult to do, of snapping all those points to the line and then calculating density.
California has a fairly robust reporting program. Around here, which we have, or I should say, in Maine, most of our data comes from reported crashes, and then we have anecdotal data on top of that. When you look at this, were there any estimates or ways to estimates kind of the difference between reported and actual crashes and so forth?
Do you mean is there any difference? I'm not sure I understand are you saying, is there a difference between reported crashes and other kinds of information like Carcass data?
Well, yeah, essentially is that, have you found a difference between kind of accidents and crashes that were reported and what you might get kind of anecdotally from a game warden or area residents? Yeah,
no, that's a really great question. And when I've engaged with people at that level, you know, at the local level, I find that usually they know where they have an opinion about where the situation is the worst, and usually it's exactly the same as the hotspot analysis. Which could beg the question, why do the hotspot analysis? Why not just talk to people? The advantage of hotspots analysis is that it formalizes it. It makes it, you know, into a formal analysis and maybe a seemingly more objective analysis. But I think there's a lot of value in discovering some of this at the local level where you have people that are paying attention, and that's not always the case. But where people are, they're tuned to what's going on. They're maybe closer to the land, or they're a fish and game warden or something. Then they're going to know where these places are. And so, for example, in California on State Route 97 in the northeast part of the state, there's a group of Caltrans, Highway Patrol, community activists, hunters, and they have been keeping track of where collisions occur since 1988, actually. So 30 years of anecdotal and Carcass location data collection as well. I think it's the longest running program like it that I'm aware of. And that's all a community effort, and they have a very high and refined knowledge of what's going on there with which species, which times of year, and so on, which would take a long time to reproduce in another way. So they've essentially created what you're talking about is sort of a homegrown analysis, and it's exactly what's occurring. So in those cases, I would say those local analyses may be better than some of the things we can do. When it comes to a statewide or inter-district comparison or formalizing, making objective the analysis, then I think it's good to do both.
Yeah.
Fraser, I had a question about the data and uploading it. So you noted that you can use shape files, text delineated files, and one other one that I missed. But is there any difference in the output if one's used compared to the other? And then a kind of a follow-up question as well is predictable format. You said that the system can handle some variations, but do you have a place online that has kind of guidance on what type of format works best, or what variations are allowed versus what the system can't handle?
Yeah, so your first question, the input data type, so shapefile or Excel file or CSV, separated value file, it doesn't affect the output. The output will be the same. The set of outputs will be the same. And then the guidance, we've actually been using this kind of feedback to develop the guidance. So there is a help menu on the system, and now we've added some frequently asked questions, which actually include some of your questions, and will include some of the participant questions as well. Sorry again for the background noise. And so that's our approach, is to keep a dynamic system of help going, so that as people try the system and they find out, hey, this doesn't seem to work for me, then we can adapt and improve it. But yeah, the help menu and then the frequently asked questions would be the primary source of that kind of assistance. So Richard and Nova, if you don't have more questions, I'm going to switch over to we have questions from the participants, and then Richard and Nova, maybe you can check back in a little bit and see if you have any more questions that you want to bring up.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, so the first question is there a function built in to identify and eliminate duplicate reports? So this came up with the Idaho data set where there was a fair amount of duplication, and we were able to flag what were probable duplicates, but the challenge came in, and so there is a tool that we built for this purpose, and we use it to flag duplicates in our California data. What we found is, because we don't necessarily know for the incoming data why duplications might occur, it's difficult to flag and then remove those points. So, for example, you might have two different types of observers. One is someone driving along in the public, they see a carcass, they report it to a system, and then maintenance staff comes along, the highway DOT maintenance staff comes along and picks up the carcass, and maybe they report it. So you might have two reports for the same exact incident. Another possibility is that in the same short time period, you might have two different roadkills occur or wildlife vehicle conflicts occur, and you might have two carcasses, but they're only 2 days apart. Each one's picked up independently. You end up with two reports. They're right near each other, and you wonder if they are duplicates or if they are actually two different events. So what we've discovered is that although we can build a tool that automatically flags what looks like duplicates, we suspect that we're also going to get some false positives, and we may end up deleting real data rather than false positive data. So that kind of led us to a standstill, and we're still, discussing and thinking about how to solve that. And I'd be happy to engage with anybody if you want to engage by email and discuss this further for your state or your situation. So the building the functions to find the duplicates is straightforward. Figuring out what to do about those duplicates is less so. Okay, next question. Are there any plans to extend this hotspot analysis to other countries or provide support to allow something similar to be set up in other countries? We would love something like this in the UK. Okay. The tool can be used anywhere. It could be used at the county level for county roads or in another country like the UK if we have the road data set. So probably for anybody who wants to do an analysis outside of the state highway system, if you send us the road data set, and especially if you send it already cut up into segments, and maybe in the UK 1 kilometer segments, then we can figure out how to put it in the system so that you can select your geography. So that puts it back on the user to some degree, the user outside of our current system, if you're in another country or you want to do it at a finer scale like a county or include local roads. Third question, what clustering tool are you using? So I think that question refers to the statistical analysis method. We use Geddes-Ord and Moran's I to look for clusters, and we have found that those give both, the first part of this is qualitative. They give what looks like the right answer, meaning when you scan around, you don't find hotspots that just don't pass the laugh test. And then the other is that they are giving answers at a scale, a geographic scale that seems like it would be useful for decision making. The exceptions to this can be if you have a highway section, say a long highway section that has many places where there's higher densities, then you may find that the whole highway is one long hotspot, which is challenging to make decisions with, but may also be true. It may be legitimate that the whole thing is a series of clusters, so to speak. Next question. You mentioned the system is not available outside the US, yet does that mean you're working on expanding it to other countries? The person is asking, they say they have a large database of roadkill in Mexico for a single highway, 150 miles near Arizona, and would love to work on a pilot test. Yeah, that does sound similar to the UK situation for those who have roadway systems outside of the state highway system that you want to look at. Let's talk more about how we could make that happen. Another question, do you have analysis for North Carolina? And if so, where can one see the mini GIS? The states that I listed are the ones that that I have shown in the presentation are the ones that we've done this analysis. And it's really up to the individual states if they have the data. You don't need data for the whole state to run the analysis. If you had data for one highway within your state, you could just upload those data, and then the analysis is just being run on that one highway. So there's no requirement that you have statewide data to use the tool. But we don't have we don't have the data from other states that I didn't show, and also we don't store or share the data that anybody runs. So if you run an analysis, it's a closed loop. You upload the data, you download the output, and we don't keep or share the products of what you did. So it's all up to you to do that as the user. The current application seems to be focused on collisions that pose a danger to drivers. Is there any collection or use of roadkill data for smaller wildlife, for example, herpetofauna, to identify sites where crossing structures might benefit species at risk? Yeah, definitely, and that's again up to the user. You could, if you have a big enough data set, for example, a herp mapper has a fairly large data set, you could use those data in this system to find those hotspots specific to certain groups or to individual species. Another question, the current application seems to be focused, oh wait, that's the same one. Oh, you have, okay. How do you encourage the safety of motorists who stop to collect data to input and to cross? How is this balanced with the need to obtain information on wildlife vehicle conflicts? So we encourage people to only collect those observations if they can do so safely. Not all of our data are collected by people stopping and taking a photograph. Sometimes people will report the incident and they have made notes on the location of the incident without stopping. That might be a mental note, or maybe they pull over later and then record it. So we definitely don't encourage or want people to stop on highways in an unsafe way. And this is in order, we do want that balance where we want to have information collected, but we don't want to do it in a way where people are endangered. And so far we think that that's the case. We don't think people are putting themselves at risk. Another question, changes to highways such as expansions can affect wildlife vehicle conflicts in various ways. Does the tool have the capability to track changes on highways through time? Yes, if you have the data for the highways, then you can do an analysis for each year, for example, that you have the data. So we've done this for a few highways in California where we have 4, 5, 6 years of data, is to run separate annual analyses and then see if locations of collisions change or the number of collisions change for different segments. So you could definitely do that just to see how things change over time or in association with a highway project. For anybody who would like to, you can still type in a question. We've got another 20 minutes or so if you want to have some more questions answered. Richard and Nova, did you have any more questions or comments on the system?
Yeah, something that I learned through my statewide assessment that I thought was really kind of an important thing to touch on was the difference between crash data and carcass data. You know, the crash data, everybody probably knows on the phone that we're dealing with reports from like NHP or some other formal documentation, whereas the carcass data can be collected very differently depending on the state you're in, if you're using citizen science or you're using various agencies. And so one of the things we found was the carcass data was very inconsistent throughout the state. So we had to take that into consideration. So just something to think about if you're going to run these tools. Do you want to use both data sets? Are they collected consistently around the state? And if not, you may want to just focus on crash data if you're looking at the safety aspect. Some of the smaller species, you may only have carcass data. So it's just some things to think about.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it reminds me, I should say, that the most of the clustering statistical tools that we use in GIS, they will compare each segment to its neighbors. And so if you're confident that, let's say, each mile segment was given the same amount of attention as its neighbors on either side, then, which is usually true, there's consistency at that scale, then when you find a cluster, it is a legitimate cluster and in terms of spatial autocorrelation or the cluster analysis. So from that point of view, you can be confident about the locations of hotspots when you see them. If you have a low level of data collection in one area or district of a state and a higher rate of data collection in another, you're more likely to see hotspots occurring in the area with higher rates of data collection than in the lower. So when hotspots don't occur in an area with low rates of data collection, you don't know if that's because there aren't any or they just there haven't been observations there. So I'm not sure if that makes sense or covers it, but and then the final part about that is that if you are looking at densities, which is a little different from are there clusters. So when you're comparing densities of incidents, whether it's carcasses or crashes between different parts of the state, you definitely want to know that they are similar rates of data collection or similar levels of effort if you're going to compare them directly. If you suspect that or know that the rate of data collection is half in one place that is in the other, maybe you could use a correction factor. Usually we don't have that kind of information. So the density comparison between one part of a state and another is definitely susceptible to that level of effort. I have another question that was typed in. Are any states with roadkill salvage laws contributing data? And if so, can that be evaluated separately? Idaho's data, the Department of Fish and Game's online system for reporting roadkill is also related to their roadkill salvage law. So if you, in Idaho, if you want to salvage an animal that's been killed on a road, you have to fill out the online form and check a box indicating that you want to salvage the animal. And so their salvaging process and their salvaging permitting is, it drives a lot of their data collection. And so those are volunteer or public contributions of data, but they're required for anybody who wants to salvage a carcass. If the question means that maybe we don't think those are as accurate for some reason, then you could pull those out and analyze them separately. In California, we analyze the crash data separately from the carcass data, and we also bring it together and analyze it together in one analysis. We also just do sometimes just large animal analyses. So there's different combinations that you could do if you're concerned about, say, the accuracy of the data or completeness of the data. Richard and Nova, do you have any last thoughts, questions, comments, et cetera?
Yeah, I have a few. In terms of the last questions, Maine is starting to, well, if you hit like a moose deer or something regulated, you need to have it tagged before you can salvage it. And that's a case now where we're starting, or the game wardens and biologists are starting to like take down longitude, latitude of where those were hit and taken from. But right now, we don't record location, just that a deer was given to someone.
Okay.
Another follow-up. If people were to send you, well, when you did like Maine and Nevada and so forth, did you use data that was sent to you, or is there a national, like federal highway of roads?
We use the national data set, and for the online tool uses the national data set. For I think for Maine we used the your Maine DOT data set, and then in California we used the Caltrans data set. I think for every other state we used the US DOT data set. Do you think that there's differences in accuracy or completeness of the federal data set? between that and the state data sets?
Not necessarily accuracy, but I know that Maine records crashes on roads which don't appear in that data set. And, so I wasn't sure if those would get snapped to the nearest road or ignored.
We have a filter so that we don't snap the, a point that occurs on a nearby road, we don't snap it to the highway or move it to the highway. I think the buffer is either 30 or 50 meters from the center line, meaning that the point has to be within that buffer to be used for that highway segment. If it's outside that, it's disregarded. So if you have a point that an incident that occurred on the highway, but the point was mislocated too far away from the highway, then it won't be used. But that also means we're not accidentally pulling in the data from adjacent local roads.
Okay. Yeah. And I had noticed a question from Canada, and so if they wanted to begin that kind of a program, then they would need to send you their road data layer.
Yeah, we would need their road data layer, and then the segmented, ideally already cut up, and then we can think about how we would install it in our tool, in terms of special cases. The project, in terms of its funding, is already ended, but for some of these things, they're cool ideas, they're good ideas, and so we would try to work on it and get it done. It's kind of on the side, so it takes a little longer maybe, but definitely we would want to work on these things.
Thank you.
All right, if I don't see any more typed questions, and Nova and Richard, if you have any more last comments, questions.
I don't.
Okay.
Yeah,
Nova?
I just want to say that, this tool has shown for our use to be a very nice user-friendly tool that we can look at various changes with time pretty quickly, and so we appreciate the efforts that went into this, and hope that other people can use it just as much. Thank you, Fraser. Great, thank you. Thanks, Nova. Thanks for your contribution.
And I would certainly echo that we have just started using it in earnest now, and I think that it's has a lot of value for our future planning on a lot of road projects and road segments.
Great. Well, thanks to you too, Richard. For anybody, thanks to both Richard and Richard Bostwick from Maine and Nova Simpson from Nevada, from those DOTs. To anybody who would like to use the tool, if all 70-something of you who are on right now jumped on and started using it, you might actually crash the system. But we welcome all of you to give it a shot. If you do run into any problems, please email me. We'll sort it out. We can investigate, if things are slow or they stall, why that's the case, and fix it. And so we'd be happy to work with anybody who wants to try it out. You can also just try it out without contacting us, and people do that all the time with the tool, so it's absolutely welcome as well. But we're also here to help. So thanks everybody for participating in this webinar, and I look forward to seeing you out on the highway.
And for all the attendees, please look out for a follow-up email that'll contain a quick survey that we hope you can fill out and share your thoughts with us. And it'll also have a link for today's presentation, a recording of the webinar, and the full research report when available.